Imagine this. You've displeased the king. Maybe you spoke out of turn, broke a law you didn't even know existed, or, worse, offended the royal family. In today's world, you might expect a fine, maybe jail time. But in the courts of kings and emperors from centuries past, punishment was not about justice. It was about sending a message. Royal punishments were not just brutal, they were performances, designed to humiliate, to cause pain for as long as possible, and to make everyone watching think twice before crossing the throne. And sometimes, death wasn't the goal at all. The goal was to break you, body and soul, while leaving you alive just enough to serve as a living warning. Today, we're going to explore 4 royal punishments so cruel, so inhumane, that death might have been a mercy. Stay with me, because the last one? It's so disturbing that even seasoned historians shudder reading about it. Punishment. 1. The Iron Chair of Sicily. Our first stop takes us to medieval Sicily, under the rule of Frederick II in the 13th century. Frederick was a brilliant ruler, multilingual, well-read, a patron of the arts. But when it came to punishing his enemies, he could be unimaginably cruel. One of his most feared devices was known simply as the Iron Chair. Picture this, a throne-like seat forged entirely from iron. The armrests, the back, even the seat itself, all made of cold, unyielding metal. But it wasn't smooth. The surface was covered with sharp iron spikes, tiny and razor-pointed, like 1,000 needles ready to pierce skin. When someone committed a crime against the crown, whether treason, espionage, or insulting the king, they would be stripped naked and forced to sit on this chair. Chains would bind their wrists and ankles, keeping them in place. Now, you might think, that's bad, but how is this worse than death? Well, this was only step 1. Underneath the chair, attendants would light a roaring fire. Slowly, the iron would heat up, the spikes would begin to burn into flesh, and the prisoner would be unable to move. Every twitch sent a new wave of agony. The punishment could last hours, sometimes days, with the victim slipping in and out of consciousness. Frederick reportedly enjoyed hosting court while the victim roasted behind him, forcing ambassadors and nobles to smell the scent of burning flesh as they conducted official business. It was psychological warfare, both for the victim and for the witnesses. The worst part? Sometimes they wouldn't let the victim die right away. The fire could be reduced so that the torture continued for days, with guards pouring cold water on wounds to keep the prisoner alive just long enough to suffer more. When you consider the heat, the spikes, the humiliation, and the slow inevitability of death, you realize this wasn't just execution. It was a carefully staged performance of agony. Punishment for 2, the Pair of Anguish, France and Spain. Our next royal torture device comes from late medieval France and Spain, and it's deceptively small. Unlike the Iron Chair, which was meant to terrify from across the room, this one fit neatly in the palm of your hand. And yet its cruelty was on an entirely different level. It was called the Pair of Anguish. This was a metal object, shaped somewhat like a pear, with 4 petals or segments at the top. A screw mechanism ran through its center. At rest, it was small enough to fit into a mouth or other bodily openings. The victim would be restrained, often in the middle of a public court or dungeon chamber, while the executioner inserted the pear. Once it was in place, the executioner would slowly turn the screw. The petals would begin to expand, and expand, and expand. If it was placed in the mouth, it would shatter teeth, dislocate jaws, and tear the soft tissues of the cheeks. If it was used for other orifices, well, let's just say the damage was catastrophic and almost always left the victim permanently disfigured. In royal courts, this device was sometimes reserved for those accused of lying to the monarch, or worse, mocking the crown. The idea wasn't necessarily to kill, it was to destroy the person's ability to speak, eat, or function normally ever again. One particularly sadistic use recorded in Spanish Inquisition archives involved noblewomen accused of moral crimes, a polite phrase for things that in modern times wouldn't be crimes at all. The pair was used not to execute them, but to correct them, leaving them alive but forever marked by their lesson. And because of its size, this torture could be carried out in small rooms with no public spectacle, perfect for secret royal punishments where the victim would re-emerge into society changed forever. Punishment number 3, lingqi, the death of 1,000 cuts. Now we travel to Imperial China during the reign of the Ming and Qing dynasties, where one of the most infamous punishments in history was reserved for crimes against the emperor himself. Lingqi, often translated as death by 1,000 cuts. Despite its name, this wasn't just about the number of wounds. It was about prolonging death to the absolute limit. The condemned would be tied to a wooden frame in the center of a courtyard. Sometimes the emperor's court officials and soldiers would be gathered to witness. An executioner, often chosen for his skill, would approach with a short, razor-sharp knife. The first cuts were almost gentle, removing small pieces of flesh from the arms or chest. Then gradually the cuts would deepen. Skin, muscle, and eventually bone would be exposed, but always in a way that kept the person alive. There are records of lingqi lasting for hours, sometimes even an entire day, with executioners trained to avoid fatal strikes until the very end. In some cases, opium or other substances were given to the victim, not to numb pain, but to keep them conscious longer. What made lingqi a royal punishment was not only its cruelty, but its symbolism. The body was left mutilated beyond recognition, denying the victim an intact corpse, which in many belief systems was essential for peace in the afterlife. To the emperor, lingqi wasn't just execution. It was the complete erasure of a person's dignity, spirit, and memory. Witnesses would often faint, others would vomit, and yet it continued for nearly 1,000 years in various forms before finally being banned in 1905. When you think about it, in a twisted way, the death itself wasn't the real punishment. The real punishment was the waiting, knowing each cut was just one step closer to the end. Punishment number 4, the brazen bull, ancient Greece and Rome. For our final punishment, we're going back even further, to the days of ancient Greece, where art, politics, and cruelty often went hand in hand. The brazen bull was the brainchild of a Greek craftsman named Piraeus of Athens. It was designed for the tyrant Phalaris, ruler of the city of Achragos in Sicily. From the outside, it was a gleaming, hollow statue of a bull, made entirely of polished bronze, but inside, it was nothing short of a furnace. The victim, often political enemies, traitors, or those who had insulted the ruler, would be stripped and forced inside through a trapdoor on the bull-AS side. Once sealed in, a fire would be lit beneath the belly of the statue. Slowly, the bronze would heat up, turning the interior into an oven. The victim's screams would echo inside the hollow chamber. But here is the most chilling part. The brazen bull was designed with a series of pipes and tubes in its head that transformed those screams into something that sounded eerily like a bull-S roar. So from the outside, the crowd and the ruler would hear what seemed like the bellowing of a great beast. Inside, the victim would suffer intense burns, blistering skin, and suffocation from the heat and smoke. Death could take minutes or hours, depending on the size of the fire. There's a dark irony to this story. According to legend, when Piraeus presented his invention to Phalaris, the tyrant decided to test it on Piraeus himself. The craftsman was locked inside, and while he was removed before he could die, he was thrown off a cliff shortly after. Even in an age of brutality, cruelty had a way of eating its own. The brazen bull became a symbol, not just of execution, but of public theater and punishment. It wasn't enough to kill. The ruler wanted a show, and for centuries, The roar of the bull was a sound that meant death was near. What ties these four punishments together isn't just the suffering they caused, it is the message they sent. Royal punishments were never only about the victim. They were about control, about making sure every subject, every courtier, and every enemy knew exactly what happened to those who defied the crown. The Iron Chair sent a message of fear through sight and scent alone. The pair of anguish robbed you of your body's dignity without even killing you. Lingchi made death a slow, unrelenting process where you felt every moment. And the brazen bull turned execution into a performance for the ruler's pleasure. In a world where kings and emperors were believed to be divinely chosen, these punishments reinforced one chilling truth. If they had the power to rule your life, they also had the power to decide exactly how you lost it. And that's why for the people who lived under these rulers, sometimes death itself wasn't the worst thing that could happen. It was the getting there.